Hi.
Okay, we'll get started in just a couple more moments here. If you want to type in the chat box where you're joining us from, that would be interesting to see today. I almost misspelled Lubbock. That would have been bad and unforgivable, wouldn't it? Since I've lived here most of the last 13 years. Wow. Well, first of all, I want to welcome you all for attending and joining us today for this collaborative webinar with the Hemp Mine. More about the Hemp Mine later. We have two speakers today, Dr. Allison Justice from the Hemp Mine, founder and CEO. More about her later as well. And Tim Wolf, Netafim agronomist. Again, more about him later, just before he presents. First, I want to say a few things about Netafim and a little bit of history, very briefly, about myself. If you're not familiar with drip irrigation, you may not have heard the word Netafim or the name Netafim, but today Netafim has grown to be the world's largest irrigation manufacturer across all types of irrigation. We were founded in 1965 in a farming community called Hatzarim at the edge of the Negev Desert, where they had very limited water supply. And I could tell you some amazing stories about some of the founders of that the company after their first crop and how impressive their yields were. But we'll save that for another day. But the important thing is that those people that were founders of the company in 1965 on that farm, many of them are still with the company in various leadership roles. And it helps us remain connected, I think, with our roots and with the industry that we're so passionate about and that we work very hard at continuing to be a pioneer in. Today we have more than 250 patents and I believe around 150 patents pending. And again, we do our best to try to stay connected to the farmer. When I was first introduced to the Hemp Mine, one of the things that I found intriguing and interesting and made me feel like we wanted to try to work more side by side with them was that their goal is to make sure that their customers are successful. And Tim, who you'll hear from later, knows for the past 6 years that we've worked very closely together. We've always talked about what does our customer need? What do we do? What do we need to change? What knowledge do we need to share to make sure that at the end of the day, the people that are investing with us are successful? Success means a lot of different things, but at the end of the day, that means you have to be profitable as well, or your business won't survive. So we always try to keep that in mind. Me personally, I've been in the irrigation industry 20 years, 13 of that with Netafim in various roles. The last 6 years or so as market segment leader for corn, soybeans, and hemp. And again, I lead and try to direct and strategize our efforts in order to make sure we are getting to the end user and helping them adopt our technology successfully. If you're living in an area in the southeastern United States that gets 45 inches of rain annually or 60 inches of rain annually, you may have thought to yourself, irrigation, why do I need irrigation? Don't just think about a drip system as an irrigation system. Think about it as the delivery system. What we know from many crops is the way to maximize your value is to not only use the drip system to irrigate, but also to fertigate or apply fertilizer, which process we call nutrigation, fits with our name, right? And so we've seen that value in various crops, not only hemp. Corn, for example, we've got a very successful grower that does a great testimony about his first year with drip. He had a perfect year for rainfall. He didn't need to irrigate that year. He had great yields on his corn crops without irrigation systems. But where he had a drip system, he used only 2 acre inches of water to apply his nutrigation package. and his yield bump was nearly 90 bushels. So it was significant. We're talking about 45, 50 variation. And we expect to see the same type of thing with hemp. When we started down this path a few years ago, like many of you may have, what we found was there wasn't really a lot of knowledge about what was correct, when nutrients should be supplied, when or what type of nutrients and how much. And so we've been working constantly to try to learn that. And today we'll share a part of that knowledge. We've been collaborating with retired Oregon State University Professor Dr. Clinton Schock for the last couple of years. And in 2020, that collaboration included 2 additional sites with Oregon State University and a couple in California with UC Davis. So Tim is going to share a part of those results today when it's his turn to speak. Again, we were really intrigued by the hemp mine because they're focused on grower success. Dr. Allison Justice has her PhD from Clemson University, and she's the founder and CEO. And one of the unique things about the hemp mine is that it's truly a vertically integrated company. So if you're a grower listening to this, understand that Dr. Justice has felt your pains in every part of the process, from genetics to how to grow the crop, to how to harvest the crop, how to ensure that you stay within the regulatory policy in the THC levels, and so on and so forth. And I think one of the first discussions I had about the hemp mine was about how long they took to work on their genetics before they actually started selling those genetics commercially. They didn't just buy genetics from somebody and 3 months later they were selling those genetics to the marketplace. If you were in the industry 5 years ago, you know, if you bought seed, you might have been lucky to have 40% germination rate, and at several dollars per seed, that was a huge financial.
Looks like he had a pause connection issue. Allison, if you want to go ahead and get started, that'd be great.
Absolutely. Yeah, I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Netafim, for putting on this webinar with us at the hemp mine. As you said, you know, farmer success is number one. If the farmer isn't successful, then Netafim's not successful, then the hemp mine's not successful. And so we definitely will not get a returning customer. And so we are trying, and with all of our power, to help these farmers be successful. And that's everything surrounding the farming piece. That's irrigation, that's pest control, and one of the most important parts, that's genetic selection, because there is a lot of variance out there as far as, you know, which type of genetics perform well due to disease resistance, due to photo period, et cetera, et cetera. And so we've been putting together technical videos to help with some of these pinch points to help you be a little more successful. So feel free to check out our YouTube videos. Netafim and the hemp mine both have accounts, so please subscribe to that. This webinar will be recorded and put onto the YouTube channels. And so again, as it was explained, the hemp mine is vertically integrated. We do everything from breeding all the way to consumer good distribution. We have production partners across the U.S. We call these our contract growers, which will supply rooted liners, clones, you might want to call them, or unrooted cuttings, URCs. And so either of these products we can ship nationwide, or there could be pickup from any of these blue states that you see here on the map. So looking at our genetic portfolio, just very quickly, we try to touch every piece that is important to the farmer. As you guys know, every year there's that new hot product that everyone is looking for, and we try to be on the cutting edge of that. We try to be on the cutting edge of that as a vegetative production crop. And so what we're giving you, you know, if it's from year 1 to year 2, it's CBC is important. You know, we've been working on that in the background. working on it long enough to stabilize a seed line? No, that takes time. But we can provide you with consistent clones that will give you a true to type and expected harvest. So we do everything from smokable flower to dual crops, meaning plants you could put outside that would produce nice smokable flower, but also have high potency for oil extraction. And we also have high terpene varieties. So varieties with 2.5, some hitting 3% terpenes. And so as this industry goes on, we're starting to see how important those terpenes are, and in some cases almost more profitable than the cannabinoids themselves. So as the industry shapes for that demand, we are shaping with it. A new program we've put together is our smokable flower variety pack. And so this is for those growers who they don't have the monetary backing to grow huge MOQs. And so this is a much smaller MOQ with 3 of our top flower producers at much smaller counts. So for example, 1 pack would be 172 tray of THM Jack, 172 tray of Peach Haze, and 1 of Cat Daddy. And so this will come with SOPs of how to grow the most you can, get the best crop out of what these genetics can offer. Also, of course, I want to invite you to our field days. This year will be our 3rd annual. It will only be located in South Carolina this year, but this is a day where we bring out farmers. We have them look at our plants when they are at the peak of their harvest. So you would know what they would look like the following year if you do choose to work with the hemp mine. This is how we collect our data between this location and about 10 other locations around the U.S. We submit our existing varieties, which are in commercial production, but then we also submit those varieties which we see high potential of that we've been working on. And we want to be able to collect that data in the field and truly understand how they perform, where the following year we can recommend those to you and feel very confident about those. So if you are interested in coming out to our field day in upstate South Carolina, subscribe to our email list and we will get that date out to you. It will be in September. But what we're all here for today is to understand the importance of water, understand the importance of getting the water to the plants. You know, there's nothing more important than this. And as it was said, you know, the Southeast gets lots of rain. But last year we would have weeks on weeks that we were not getting any rain. And as you know, it's very hot. So having that capability to irrigate while those dry times are happening is imperative. If you've grown hemp before, you know if they dry down too much, they start to yellow, those leaves drop, and all that equals is a loss in yield, a loss in potency. And so what we wanted to do is bring Netafim to you, you know, let the professionals talk, walk us through why irrigation is so important. Some of the pinch points you might not understand, such as pressure and, you know, maybe you're used to drip irrigation and this is tape irrigation. So understanding some of those important things that will help you be successful as a hemp farmer. You know, please ask as many questions as you can, type them in the chat bar, or we'll have some Q&A here at the end. So thank you, and here's to you, Netafim.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Justice. Much appreciated. We're going to push a poll out just to get an idea of percentage of growers and other parts of the industry that are attending. While we do that, I'm going to go ahead and click one of those too. I'm going to post the Netafim USA website that you would go to for the link to the data we have, the information we have, crop and product application for hemp. So that's coming through now so that you can copy and paste it later. And as we have field days, or if we have other virtual events, we keep that site updated as well. We did do 3 events last year. I expect we'll do at least 1 more this year. And hopefully we can coordinate and work with the hemp mine and have somebody from Netafim present when they do their field day as well. So really looking forward to that. One other thing that I'd like to mention, I'm not on here to discuss specifically Netafim products, but last year we did make a decision internally to launch a specific product toward the hemp industry, understanding that was typically in the marketplace. And so we launched a product, a drip line product called Pioneer Line. Why does that matter? Because we understand the importance of sustainability. And with Pioneer Line, you're getting a product that is delivered to you from post-consumer recycled material. There's a link on, if you follow that link that I just sent, if you scroll down in that, you'll see a video that's about Streamline X Regen. Pioneer Line is a version of Streamline X Regen. And again, it's almost, I can't share the percentages, I personally don't even know, but it's significant percentage of post-consumer recycled material. We wish we could lift up the material from across the US and everywhere else in the world and have it work on an economy of scale to where we could recycle everything that's not going to be reused right away. For now, it's a significant player in much of California, and for sure in the future, that will be something that expands. So keep that in mind. And then one last thing that I'm going to throw in, because my background in the irrigation industry before Netafim was as a system designer, both in landscape, but also agriculture. And I want to tell you 2 of the most important things you can have with the drip system. And I'll tell you why I'm saying this, because Tim's going to talk about fertility a little bit. And fertilizers, if they're not applied correctly, if it's not managed correctly, can potentially plug a drip system. So how do you know? The 2 most important diagnostic tools that you have with the drip system are a pressure gauge and a flow meter. So let's say you have a 1-acre drip system or a 10-acre drip system. And when you start that system up, let's say the flow is 100 gallons a minute at 15 PSI. If your flow starts to go down and your pressure starts to go up, that means you've got a problem. If you don't have those 2 diagnostic tools, you're not going to know you're starting to have plugging in the system until you've plugged it up a lot, and it may be recoverable. But when you have to try to unplug a drip system, it's time and it's materials and it's money. So again, pressure gauge, flow meter, remember that. Even if you have a manual operated system, you still want to know what's the baseline operating pressure and what's the baseline flow of the system. If you have that, you can keep yourself, I think Tim Wolf talks about, or one of our other agronomists, Andy Sosby, about driving on a country road and staying out of the borrow ditches, right? If you have those 2 tools, you can stay out of the borrow ditches. So with that, well, let's see, I'm supposed to take a look at the poll, sorry. Q. We are 50% growers, 38% Netafim distributors, and 13% other consultants. So thank you for sharing in that. If you have questions, also I should have said, feel free to type those in the comments section. If I get an appropriate time to ask during Tim's presentation, I'll stop him and ask. If it's something easy for me to answer, I'll type in an answer. And if not, we'll finish up at the end. And again, questions for Dr. Justice as well are fine. And I did type in the notes there that this was being recorded. I was supposed to say that at the beginning. I actually had a big asterisk by it in my notes and completely missed it. So apologies for that. Tim Wolf has been in the agriculture industry all of his life. He's an alum of South Dakota State University. He lives pretty close to there again now, which is, I know, a relief for him. He's lived around mostly the Central Plains in the U.S. and was in various agronomy type roles with Pioneer for many, many years. That was all irrigated crop, at least for the most part. And he's been in the irrigation industry about 12 years, 6 of those with Netafim. He's been an amazing addition to our team, driven knowledge sharing, spends a lot of time in the field with growers, understanding what's going on, understanding the adjustments that need to be made in nutrient application, both the type, but also the quantities. And the amazing thing about drip, you can put the right type, you can put the right quantity, and you can put it exactly where you need it, into the plant's root zones. So Tim's going to talk about agronomy. Some of that will be irrigation related. Some of it will be nutrigation related. With that, Tim, I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much, Jim. As I share my screen, I will get set up. As that loads in, I wanted to, did this right screen come up, guys?
No.
There
you
how about
are.
now? All
Got it.
right. Just a little bit of delay. Anyway, thanks for that kind introduction, Jim. I appreciate that. A couple things to add to what he said. He mentioned that I spent most of my time in the Midwest, so a lot of the information that I'm going to share and my own opinions are based and biased in the Midwest. So if you're outside of that, I may not align perfectly, but I just wanted to say that up front so that you understand where I'm coming from. So I'm going to get a pointer here so I can really go to town. So as Jim mentioned at the beginning, what I'll be sharing mostly today is based upon research done in Oregon by Dr. Clint Schock and our own Netafim's own Dr. Ami Gips was collaborating in that research. 2 years so far. Majority of what I'm going to share is from 2020. The focus of the research has been to identify a crop coefficient or an ETC for hemp. You know, we've got a lot of years of using ETC or evapotranspiration, and we have a reference ET for everything, but an ETC specifically for hemp is still in the works. So that's the purpose of the research. And then there was some nutrient management stuff that they did at Oregon as well that I'll share a little bit of as well. So before I start, I want to kind of talk a little bit about what is ETC, so we're all kind of starting from the same spot. Evapotranspiration, or ET, is a combination of two things: the evaporation of the water from the soil surface mostly, and the transpiration of the water through the plant to the plant surface and then transpiring it into the air. So to take that to a human like myself, I perspire or I sweat when I get hot, and that quantity in a plant is called transpiration. And so when you add those two up, it's ET. So that what changes that? Temperature changes that, wind speed, sunlight. There's a number of factors that change that. And so it's a reference number, ETO, or a reference is a reference amount of evapotranspiration that all plants experience. And like I said a second ago, there's no official coefficient currently for hemp. So the research that we're going to talk about is going to try to address that. So first of all, an update. If you knew what we did in 19, I'm just going to talk about 2020 in the hemp research. We added some different varieties because the industry's going to adding or using a lot more varieties. There was some auto flower varieties and the CBD and the CBG varieties added to the research, along with 2 of the full season photo period varieties, White and Queen Dream. They were seeded on June 5th. How the system was set up in 30-inch rows. It was overplanted or overseeded and then thinned so that we had a perfect stand, perfect spacing, and the goal for the auto flowers was 1 plant per foot and 17 plants for 25 feet, or about 18 inches between plants for the full season varieties. And I wanted to just give you the first chart. The canopy closed on the full season varieties about 50 to 60 days after planting. The autoflower varieties never did canopy. So just so you understand, that has impact on how we irrigate and how we set up research, and also how you set up in the commercial field. So a picture of that from the research site on around August 1st. The autoflower varieties are over on the right-hand side, and then the full season varieties. Understand there was still some more biomass accumulation after that date, but just an idea of kind of what the differences are so you could visualize if you're not familiar with the autoflower varieties. So back to the research, again at Ontario, Oregon. Seeded on the 5th of June, they did uniform watering for all of the groups for about 5 weeks for all the reps and all the different varieties. And then the ET study irrigation begins about 5 weeks later. So what they wanted to look at was different levels of irrigation. So they had 100% of ET, or replacing the quantity that the plant transpired and the environment took, 100%, and then less than that, 80%, 60%, and 40% of the reference ET. And we'll be talking about those in the next few slides, but that was the setup. So a couple of observations from the researchers: the autoflower varieties use less water than they expected that they would from the beginning. The full season hemp varieties, however, used more than they expected. So that was an interesting observation from the researchers. And one other reference point that I wanted to make was that the Dream Queen at the 80% of ET set was at harvest time was a total biomass weight of over 12,000 pounds. So just so you get an idea of what as a reference, what kind of biomass that we were looking at with the research. So the different ET tests are graphically on here now. So 100% ET, what they were thinking they were going to use is around 22 or 23 inches of total water. And then the 80%, just to put numbers on what 100%, 80%, 60%, 40%, what that looks like, and quantifying that. 100%, they were thinking around 22, 23 inches. The 80% was 16, 17, maybe close to 18, and that's a full season. The 60% was at around 12 or 13 inches, and the 40% ET experiment was going to use around 8, maybe a little more than 8. So just so you have a reference of how much water differences the different ETs looked at. As I mentioned earlier, the overall water that was used on the large full season varieties was close to 29. That's rainfall and irrigation. So it's a little bit more, but just so you get an idea of what that looks like and how that quantifies into inches. So this chart shows us a couple different things. Across the bottom is the days of the season of the year. So planting was around the June 5th. So right in here was when planting was. So the red lines or the red bars is the ET for the reference, or the full amount of water. If we replace the full amount of water, what that would look like. So right away after planting, there was a day that ETO, or reference ETO, was over a ½ an inch of water needed at Oregon. And there was only a couple of days that were a ½ inch of water needed for full irrigation. Another observation that I had as I looked at this is 3/10 of an inch, which a lot of times will set irrigation up for corn, which I'm really familiar with. 3/10 to 3/500. A lot of days, hemp takes that amount of water as a full irrigation if you want to do 100% of ETO. The other thing that this chart shows us in the blue bars is when did it rain and how much did it rain. There was a fair amount of rain early up through around the 4th of July, and then it shut off. And if you remember me saying this earlier, the irrigation ET experiment started about 5 weeks after planting. So soon after this, there really wasn't a lot of rain, only a couple of really small rains right toward the end, which is nice because it's really clean research then, and we know exactly the amount of water that we applied based on the ET. One other thing with this chart that shows us is as we're accumulating biomass, the plants need more water, need more ET, and then as it senesces and it declines off toward to the end, toward maturity. So the results, and there's a lot of data on this chart, results I want to share with you. Our averages for each of the different varieties. So we've got the autoflower CBG variety and the CBD variety on top here, then the 2 full season, the white and the Dream Queen down below, and then each of the different ET experiments, and then the average of each one of them. So the total cannabinoid percentage is the cannabinoid flower as it responds to the irrigation levels in yellow. So what we're doing is the percentage of the flower to the total that was harvested, percentage cannabinoid. So in the yellow with the CBG, the 60% ET experiment gave us the highest percent of the cannabinoid. In the CBD, we were at 80, and 100% ET produced the highest percent of flowers as compared to the other experiments. So the total cannabinoid in pounds per acre, and I had to convert it to pounds per acre, everything was in metric, but pounds per acre, again, this is the total cannabinoid flower production by drip irrigation level. So 358 pounds per acre of the flowers in the CBG variety, 358. That is at the 60% ET level again. And then the autoflower CBD variety, 251, that's at 100%. And then the other 2 full seasons, again, the photo period, full season hemps, 479, 463. So most everything was 100% irrigated ET to produce the most pounds of flowers, cannabinoid flowers. So the third thing I'm showing you is water use efficiency. So if you're limited in water or want to know how do I best use what water that I have in an irrigation experiment, we're always interested in that. And this is reflected in the total number of pounds per acre inch applied of water. So the very best pounds per acre inch in the CBG variety was 21.3 pounds of the cannabinoid per acre inch. In fact, that was the overall winner in water use efficiency, which was interesting. The CBD variety was interesting as well. to be the most efficient was all the way down to 40%. And then the white and the Dream Queen were at 80% and 40%. To be the most efficient with what water. So if you're limited in water, that could be a factor. So to summarize then, the water use efficiency winner of the total experiment was the CBG variety at 60% ET, and the total cannabinoid in pounds was the white right here at 479, and the cannabinoid percentage was over here, the Dream Queen at 15.6. So a conclusion that we could potentially make and trying to figure out what is the ETC that we'll probably end up concluding, and this is only after 1 year, so I hesitate to make a conclusion, but it appears a really efficient spot is around 80% ET for all varieties. Could potentially go a little bit lower with the autoflower varieties. So the nutrient stuff that I wanted to cover quickly is here, and how it was managed by Clint and his staff was they took both soil samples and leaf tissue samples every week throughout the season, starting around the 17th of July. Each week they collected those and compared them to a reference number. And this is an ideal reference number in this column right here. And they compared that weekly, and then fertigated or fertilized according to where the reference was in accordance with where they wanted to be. So on the right-hand side, the nutrients were only applied when they were deficient, and the decision was made weekly. So on the 8th and the 20th of July, they did add nitrogen for total pounds of 40 pounds of nitrogen at the site. The potassium, they added 10 pounds each every week from the end of July all the way through into the third week of September. A little bit of boron late July, for a total of about a half pound of boron. So I just have the first 2 weeks here as a reference of how the chart looks. So in other words, if we saw a deficient or a deficit, nutrients were applied. If there was no deficit and the soil was providing enough, then there was nothing applied. It goes back to something that we typically like doing because you have supreme control with the drip system. You can measure and then manage, and doing that on a weekly basis for this trial kind of is a good example of how we like to manage and have the ability to manage with a drip irrigation system. So I wanted to take a little bit more time to talk a little bit more about another strategy for irrigation. We have the ET experiment, but another one is to use soil moisture probes. And I wanted to talk just briefly about a couple different reference items that I wanted to set a baseline for. Soil, water, and air, what the roots see as they grow in an ideal manner is about half sandsilt clay and organic matter. The other half is water and air at about 25% water, 25% air at field capacity. So in other words, it's a nice balanced quantity of water and air. In a super saturated condition, water will push out more air, so the ideal environment doesn't exist for the plant roots, or the opposite may be true if it's under super dry or drought conditions. the air exceeds the 25% and the water is less. Our ideal is the 50, 25, 25, and that's what we strive for. We'll use soil moisture probes or some type of a measuring device to try and achieve what we feel like is optimum and what the roots see. So to take it a step further, there's different types of soil. If you have a sand soil, a loam soil, or maybe a silty clay loam soil, we have what we call field capacity. And like I said, it's a 50, 25, 25 blend typically at field capacity. Field capacity is the point at which the soil cannot hold any more water and it is at that balance level. If I go over that, I will crowd out some of the air, and I typically will push water down through the profile, or the water may run off depending on the topography of the land. But field capacity is what the level of water and air that it'll hold at the maximum point. So in sand, loam, and silty clay loam, that's a different level. Wilting point, on the other hand, is the point at which the plant cannot extract any more water out of the soil. There's still water in the soil. As you can see, there's still water quantity in the soil, but it can't extract anymore. So the difference between wilting point and field capacity is available water. And as irrigators, what we want to manage is available water. So in a sand, in this example of sand, a wilting point is about 1 inch of water per foot, 2 inches of water per foot at field capacity. So we're managing about 1 inch. In loam, it's a larger amount. Silty clay loam, about the same amount, but at a higher level of moisture. So we're managing this. One other point that I want to make is we want to try and manage it toward the upper half of available water. So in a scenario where we can measure in the upper half, the plant doesn't have to work as hard to extract the water, and so it's in a better environment. More energy is pushed toward yield in that example. So take home on this slide is I want to keep my irrigation level toward field capacity if I can, to put the plant in the very best environment. And an apparatus that we can use to measure that and understand that is a soil moisture probe. So we did have some soil moisture probes at the site in Oregon in 2020. This is a really busy chart, so I'm going to take a couple minutes to explain what this chart tells us. So each of these color differences is a different sensor along the Syntek Probe. Along the bottom, these are the sensors, and these are in metric. So about 2 inches, at about 5 inches, at about what would that be? 8 inches, and so on. The deeper that you go. So the gray area right here is the amount of water that was consumed along the growing season, the amount of water that was consumed at that really shallow level, at that 2 inch level. And then at about the 6 or 8 inch level is the yellow, and then the other levels are on up above here. So it was consuming water all the way along. But what I wanted to show with this, at the 80% irrigation test, the majority of the water was being consumed in the shallow and up to about 8 inches, 10 inches. Nearly 80% of the water was being consumed in that shallow. Now remember, the irrigation dripper line was on the surface, so a majority of the water was deposited there and consumed there. There was a little bit that was consumed deeper, but the majority of the water was consumed. And then these bars represent the amount of rain or irrigation that happened on those particular days. So In other words, the amount that was consumed at the 80% ET, which would represent a really hot day, it still was consumed a majority in the surface. As we moved later in the season, when there was less rain and irrigation, it was still being consumed again toward the surface. There was a few times in here where the ET went way down, then the roots would consume a little bit more deeper in the root zone or in the soil profile. So when demand was less, the plant would pull a balance. When it was pulling the hard, it was getting most of its water from the surface. Changed slightly with the 60% irrigation, which would be less water, and the plant's also pulling harder, a higher percentage from the surface, and then again, the total, almost all of it was from that the top two sensors. As the plant senesced, then it was getting more from the deeper levels, but the plant was mostly done here. So I bring this information up because I want you to understand with the soil moisture probe, we can understand what's going on under the surface and schedule our irrigation based on quantities of water, and how that relates to the ET experiment was quite interesting. So some conclusions that I'd like to try and make from the research in 2020 in Oregon is, first of all, we discovered the canopy, and we talked about the plant canopy differs by varieties. Some of the autoflower varieties had a lot smaller canopy. They never really did canopy all the way across the 30-inch row, which may suggest if we're growing those varieties, those autoflower smaller plant varieties, we maybe could narrow the rows up, increase our population to more than one plant per foot like we had in the experiment. But that was an interesting observation. So based upon the experience that we had this year, an ETC for hemp, maybe in that, like I suggested on the one slide, 60 to maybe 80% of the reference ETO would be where it would land. And again, that's variety and type dependent. The autoflower smaller canopy ones seem to appreciate the 60% of ET reference. The larger, bigger biomass, fuller season varieties were closer to 80. So it is variety and type dependent, but it gave us a little bit of look at those two different ET levels. So we, the other thing that we talked about today was to monitor both soil and tissue on a weekly for best management practices. Know what's going on with the plant, know what's going on in the soil, and again, measure, then manage. Soil moisture probes may be really helpful, especially in rainfall areas. I didn't talk about that when I was talking about the soil moisture probes. In a dry environment, the ET works great, but when we get in, the ET method of irrigating or scheduling works great. But when we get into rainfall areas, probes or some type of a sensor will really help us to understand what is the effective rain. So if I get 2 inches of rain in 20 minutes, how much of that is truly effective? Did a lot of it run off? Did a lot of it flush through? You have an idea of what that looks like. If I get 2 inches of rain over a week, then it may be a higher level. The ET measurement scheduling isn't as effective. We're estimating that. With sensors, we can actually measure and manage. So if you're in a rainfall area, might recommend using some type of a sensor. The sensor that we used in this was the Syntek sensor. So again, the highest level of control, I said this many times, I want to conclude with this, The Netafim drip system gives you the highest level of control of water and nutrients, so you can get the very best out of each plant with the Netafim drip system. So with that, I appreciate your kind attention. If we have time, would entertain any questions that you might have. Back to you, Jim.
Right, thank you, Tim. So I think I answered all the questions as they came through. There was a question regarding how often do we irrigate, right? And that's why we really like the use of sensors, because it's a great way to understand what's going on below the surface, to understand not only how much do I need to irrigate, but when do I need to irrigate. There are a myriad of sensors available out there. It's true, like it is with most things. If you go with the most budget, the accuracy is not going to be as good. It's not as quality of a product. However, maybe if you're a really small grow and you're really trying to watch your budget tight, even an inexpensive sensor will help you learn over the course of a season and give you some directional sense of how your water level is being managed. Wanted to throw in on that 50 to 80%, looking like in general is a good guideline. Again, very variety dependent or type dependent. But you know, if you think about it, it should make sense, right? Because original ET was calculated using weighing lysimeters, so they weighed the soil dry and wet, but the soil in those studies to establish ET is wetted from the surface by sprinklers. So for sure, there's going to be the E part of it, the evaporation part, and depending on temperatures and soil types, a significant amount of the water applied at the surface can evaporate. Whereas if you're using drip and the drip line is buried, you're not totally wetting the entire surface all the time. You may have some moisture at a small area of the surface, but that helps to mitigate the evaporation part of ET, right? So 80% probably of ET would be a good starting point with almost any crop to work backwards from. How do you find ET for your local area? Get online and look up ET for LaGrange, Oregon, or wherever you happen to be. You can probably find a website that's close, at least gives you something directionally. It's also nice to have a rain gauge, even just a manual one, right at your farm, so you can know what actual rainfall is. And Tim talked a little bit about rainfall and whether or not it was effective. Last thing I wanted to say was, from the start, we talked about utilizing the drip system as a delivery source, a delivery not just for your irrigation water, but your fertilizer. There are a myriad of sources of fertilizer, and I'm pretty sure if you ask any of them if it's okay to use through drip, a huge percentage of them are going to say yes. You need to check. Whether it's a small grow or a 500-acre farm, we suggest to our customers every new load of fertilizer, they do a jar test. So if they're going to inject a certain amount of ounces per 10,000 gallons or whatever the different measurement might be, we suggest you take a representative amount of the fertilizer, put it in a glass jar, shake it up, wait 24 hours and see what happens. If you have a bunch of cottage cheese looking stuff in your irrigation water the next day, you're not going to use that fertilizer to apply in your drip system. The jar test. Number two is we recommend that you inject the fertilizer ahead of the filter, because that way, once you inject it, if there's some compatibility problem because of the bicarbonates or whatever it might be in the water to the fertilizer, at least your filter is going to catch the bulk of that and protect your drip system. That's the reason for the filter. So important safety tip, I guess I would say. Dr. Justice, do you have anything, as Tim was talking through there, that came to mind that you'd like to highlight, or anything else that you thought of from your discussion that you would like to share? I think you're on mute. At least I can't hear it.
Hear me now?
We got you.
Okay. Yeah, I was just going to mention, you said there were plenty of soil moisture sensors. I was going to see if you could throw out a few names of your top choices, where people can understand where to look for those.
Well, the ones that we sell 2 or 3 different ones. We sell ones that we manufacture ourselves. We sell one called a Delta T. It's really used in scientific projects. Its measurement area is very small. Installation is difficult, but it's highly accurate, but it's only measuring about a golf ball size area. So you have to install individually a whole bunch of them to see what's going on. So it's not really practical for most people. We sell the Syntek sensors, and those are available through, I think, numerous sources. They're a great sensor, as was noted in the comments in the chat. A Syntek Probe has a sensor basically every 4 inches, and you can get them in different total lengths. There are different connectivity methods. You can either have, it can be self-contained with a modem so that it sends everything through the cloud and you can see it on your phone or on your laptop or your iPad, or you can get a Bluetooth model that you have to go close enough for the Bluetooth function to work and have it upload to your iPad or your phone every day to have a look. That's significantly less than the full version that has the modem and so on. So that's, for my preference, that's the one that I'm most familiar with. There are a lot. If you have a local irrigation dealer, might be best to see what they are using, because if they're familiar with it and they're using it, they're probably set up to give you the best support.
Okay, thank you.
Great. So I didn't have my email address up, but I did post it in the chat. If anybody needs to email me, feel free. If I don't know the answer to your question, I'll forward it on. I've already got one to do. Tim's email was posted. You can find Dr. Justice on the website, thehempmine.com. And we want to thank you again for joining us. Again, don't be afraid to ask questions. We want people to be successful, and it takes a lot of different partners to make good things happen.
That's right. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.